At 4:47 in the morning on September 14th, 1944, Marcel Rousseau knelt in complete darkness beside a Panzer IV tank, his fingers tracing the warm metal housing of the engine compartment. Complete darkness. Not because it was still night. The sun had risen 22 minutes earlier. Marcel could hear birds in the trees surrounding the German tank depot. He could feel the morning warmth on his face. Marcel Rousseau was completely blind. He had been blind for 8 months, the result of a German artillery shell that had detonated 30 feet from his position near Caen. The blast had not killed him, but the shrapnel had destroyed both his optic nerves. Now, at 34 years old, former French Army mechanic, former resistance fighter, he was about to attempt something that sighted men said was impossible. 12 Panzer IV tanks sat in this depot 4 miles outside Epinal. The German 11th Panzer Division was preparing to counterattack American forces that had crossed the Moselle River 18 hours earlier. These tanks would leave this depot at 6 a.m. in 73 minutes. If those tanks reached the American positions, intelligence estimated 400 to 600 Allied casualties. The Americans had crossed with light infantry. No anti-tank guns. No air support due to heavy cloud cover. Just men with rifles against 30-ton armored vehicles. The French resistance had sent Marcel because he was the only person who could get close enough. The German sentries would never suspect a blind man. Marcel had exactly 15 minutes before the next patrol walked through. He had 18 inches of insulated copper wire in his pocket. No tools, no explosives, nothing that would look suspicious if the Germans searched him. Just wire. And a technique so simple, so ridiculous, that when Marcel had explained it to the resistance commander 3 days earlier, the man had laughed. Then he had stopped laughing when Marcel demonstrated it on a captured German truck. The engine seized completely in 90 seconds. Marcel's fingers found the spot he needed, the junction where the ignition wiring harness connected to the magneto. Every Panzer IV had the same design. He had memorized the layout before he lost his sight. Now he would find out if memory and touch were enough. Marcel Rousseau had been a mechanic since he was 16 years old. His father owned a garage in Lyon. By age 19, Marcel could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. By 22, he could rebuild a transmission blindfolded. His father used to joke about that. It stopped being a joke in January 1944. When Germany invaded France in 1940, Marcel joined the French army as a vehicle maintenance specialist. He spent 2 years keeping aging French trucks and tanks running. When France fell, he returned to Lyon. He joined the resistance in 1942. His mechanical skills made him valuable. The resistance needed someone who could sabotage German vehicles, repair Allied equipment dropped by parachute, and train others in vehicle maintenance. Marcel had personally sabotaged 37 German vehicles between 1942 and 1943. Trucks mostly, a few half-tracks. He knew how to make a vehicle fail in ways that looked like mechanical breakdown rather than sabotage. Sugar and fuel tanks was amateur work. Marcel would weaken a drive shaft so it would snap under load 3 days later. He would file down a bearing so it would overheat and seize during operation. The Germans never suspected sabotage. They blamed poor maintenance and the stress of warfare on mechanical systems. Then came Normandy, June 1944. Marcel was with a resistance unit coordinating with Allied forces near Caen. The German artillery barrage caught them in an open field. Marcel woke up in a field hospital 3 days later, both eyes bandaged. The doctor explained the shrapnel damage. Permanent. Complete bilateral optic nerve destruction. Marcel thought his contribution to the war was finished. The resistance commander thought so too. They gave Marcel simple tasks: radio monitoring, message relay. Jobs that did not require sight. But Marcel kept working with engines. He discovered something interesting. Without sight, his sense of touch became extraordinarily sensitive. He could feel temperature differences of 1 or 2 degrees. He could detect vibrations in metal that sighted mechanics missed. He could identify parts by weight and texture with perfect accuracy. And he developed the wire trick. The German Panzer IV was one of the most reliable tanks in the Wehrmacht arsenal. 25 tons of steel, a 300-horsepower Maybach HL 120 TRM engine, 75mm main gun, armor ranging from 20mm to 80mm thick. The Americans had learned to fear these tanks. A single Panzer IV could destroy an entire infantry platoon if caught in the open. The 75mm gun could penetrate most Allied tank armor at 1,000 yards. The resistance had tried to sabotage German tanks before. The results had been disastrous. In May 1944, a resistance team attempted to place explosives under a Panzer III in a depot near Dijon. The explosives detonated prematurely. All 4 men died. The tank suffered minor damage and was operational 6 hours later. In July 1944, another team tried to drain the fuel from tanks in a German motor pool. They were discovered by sentries. 3 men were shot trying to escape. The survivors were executed the next day. The problem was simple. German tank depots were heavily guarded. Sentries patrolled every 15 to 20 minutes. The tanks themselves were locked. Any attempt to break into the engine compartment or crew hatches would leave obvious signs of tampering. Explosives powerful enough to destroy a tank were too large to conceal. Smaller charges might damage components, but would alert the Germans to sabotage. They would simply repair the damage and increase security. The resistance needed a method that was silent. No explosions to alert guards. Quick. Had to be done during the gap between guard patrols. Undetectable. Could not leave visible signs of sabotage. Effective. Had to disable the tank. Permanently. Not just cause temporary problems. Accessible. Required minimal equipment that could be hidden easily. No such method existed. Conventional sabotage techniques failed at least one of these requirements. The situation near Epinal made the problem urgent. American forces had crossed the Moselle River on September 13th. They had established a bridgehead, but were vulnerable. German intelligence knew this. The 11th Panzer Division was preparing to counterattack. The resistance intercepted German communications. 12 Panzer IVs would depart from the depot outside Epinal at 6 a.m. on September 14th. They would reach the American bridgehead by 8:30 a.m. The Americans had no effective anti-tank defenses in position. Light infantry with bazookas could damage a Panzer IV, but only with perfect shots at close range. The odds were not good. The resistance commander called an emergency meeting on September 11th. The question was simple. How do you stop 12 tanks with no explosives, no anti-tank weapons, and less than 3 days to prepare? 20 resistance fighters attended. They proposed 14 different plans. All were rejected as too risky, too slow, or unlikely to succeed. Then Marcel spoke. Marcel explained his idea. The room went silent for about 5 seconds. Then someone laughed. "You want to stop tanks with wire?" The speaker was Jean-Pierre, a former army officer. "Marcel, with respect, you cannot even see the tanks. How would you know where to place the wire?" "I memorized the layout of German vehicles before I lost my sight," Marcel said. "I can work by touch." Another resistance fighter, Claude, shook his head. "Even if you could find the right spot, wire cannot disable a tank. The engine compartments are sealed. The Germans check them before operations." "The Germans check for visible damage," Marcel said. "They look for cut wires, broken components, obvious sabotage. They do not look for a single piece of wire placed in a specific location." The resistance commander, a man named Laurent, asked the key question. "Marcel, explain exactly how this wire would stop a 25-ton tank," Marcel explained. The Panzer IV used a magneto-ignition system. The magneto generated electrical current that fired the spark plugs. The system operated at approximately 15,000 volts. The wiring was insulated, but the insulation was not perfect. At certain junction points, the high-voltage wire came very close to grounded metal components. If you placed a piece of copper wire across the gap between the high-voltage line and the ground, you created a short circuit. Not immediately. The wire had to heat up first. The electrical current would flow through the copper wire instead of the spark plugs. The engine would run normally for about 60 to 90 seconds. Then the wire would heat up enough to partially melt. The resistance would increase. The voltage would spike. The magneto would burn out. Once the magneto burned out, the engine would stop. No spark. Plugs firing meant no combustion. No combustion meant no power. The tank would be immobile. And here was the clever part. The burnout would look like a component failure. The Germans would find a burned-out magneto and assume it failed due to age or manufacturing defect. They might find the wire, but it would look like a loose piece of debris that accidentally fell into the engine compartment. Jean-Pierre was skeptical. This sounds like a theory. Has anyone actually tested this? I tested it yesterday, Marcel said. On the captured German truck we keep at the farm. The truck was running. I placed the wire. 90 seconds later, the engine stopped. I examined the magneto. Completely burned out. Claude objected again. A truck is not a tank. The Panzer IV has armor, guards, locks on the engine compartments. The engine compartments have ventilation grills, Marcel said. I can reach through the grills to access the wiring. I do not need to open anything. Laurent asked the question everyone was thinking. Marcel, you cannot see. How would you reach the depot? How would you navigate between tanks? How would you know if guards are approaching? I will need a guide, Marcel admitted. Someone to lead me to the depot and warn me when patrols are near. But once I am at a tank, I can work by touch. I am faster working blind than most mechanics are working with full sight. The room remained skeptical. The idea seemed too simple, too fragile. 12 tanks, 15 minutes. A blind man with wire. Laurent made a decision. Demonstrate it again. Tomorrow, on the truck. Show us it was not luck. The resistance had tried other plans before Marcel's wire idea. Everyone had failed or been abandoned as too risky. The first plan had been to request American artillery support. Shell the tank depot from a distance. Simple, effective. The Americans said no. The depot was 4 miles behind German lines. To hit it accurately, they would need to move artillery forward, which would expose the guns to German counterfire. And there was no guarantee artillery would destroy tanks inside reinforced shelters. The Panzer IVs were kept in concrete bunkers, designed to withstand shelling. Risk assessment, high chance of failure. High cost in ammunition and artillery positions. Low probability of destroying enough tanks to matter. Status, rejected by American command on September 10th. The second plan involved requesting air support. P-47. Thunderbolts equipped with bombs and rockets could destroy the tank depot. Weather forecast for September 13th through 15th. Heavy cloud cover, ceiling below 500 feet. Visibility less than 1 mile. No air operations possible. The Americans could try to fly anyway, but close air support in bad weather against a hardened target had failure rates above 60%. The risk of hitting civilian areas near the depot was unacceptable. Status, impossible due to weather conditions. The third plan was to ambush the tank column on the road between the depot and the American bridgehead. The resistance had anti-tank mines and a few Panzerfaust weapons captured from German supplies. The problem was mathematics. 12 Panzershares moving in column. The resistance had 4 anti-tank mines and 3 Panzerfaust launchers. In the best possible scenario, they might destroy 4 tanks. The remaining 8 tanks would continue to the bridgehead. Worse, the ambush would alert the Germans to active resistance operations in the area. Reprisals would be severe. German policy was to execute 10 civilians for every German soldier killed. A tank crew was 5 men. 4 destroyed tanks meant 20 dead Germans. The Germans would execute 200 French civilians. The resistance commander calculated the cost. Trade 200 civilian lives to maybe destroy 4 tanks out of 12. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Status, rejected due to insufficient weapons and unacceptable civilian casualties. The fourth plan came closest to success. A resistance fighter named Antoine, who spoke fluent German, volunteered to infiltrate the depot disguised as a German mechanic. He would sabotage the tanks from inside. Antoine spent 2 days preparing. He memorized German military protocols. He obtained a German uniform. He practiced his cover story. He was supposed to report for duty at the depot on September 12th. Antoine made it through the first checkpoint. His German was perfect. His uniform was authentic. The guards accepted his papers and let him enter the depot compound. He made it 30 minutes before a German sergeant recognized him. Antoine had worked at a garage in Epinal before the war. The sergeant had brought his personal car to that garage for repairs in 1942. The sergeant remembered Antoine's face. Antoine was arrested, interrogated, executed on September 13th at 6:00 a.m. The Germans did not publicize the execution, but word reached the resistance through informants inside the German garrison. Status: complete failure. 1 man dead. German security increased at the depot. By the evening of September 11th, the resistance had exhausted conventional options. Artillery strikes were unavailable. Air support was grounded by weather. Ambush was insufficient. Infiltration had been tried and failed. The tanks would leave the depot in less than 48 hours. American soldiers would face 12 Panzer IVs with no effective defense. The estimated casualties remained 400 to 600 men. Laurent, the resistance commander, faced an impossible choice: attempt another risky operation that would probably fail and might cost more lives, or do nothing and let the Americans face the tanks alone. That was when Marcel proposed the wire trick. The demonstration happened on September 12th at 2:00 p.m. The captured German truck was parked behind a barn on a farm 8 miles from Epinal. 15 resistance fighters gathered to watch. Marcel asked for silence. He needed to hear the engine. Someone started the truck. The engine settled into a rough idle. German military trucks in 1944 were not known for smooth operation. This one sounded like most. A rattling, uneven rumble. Marcel approached the truck. His hands moved across the hood, finding the edges, the latches. Someone guided him to the side where the engine compartment could be accessed through a maintenance panel. He opened the panel by feel. His hands moved into the engine compartment. The resistance fighters watched. Marcel's fingers traced components: fuel lines, coolant hoses, electrical wiring. He found what he was looking for in 14 seconds. He pulled the copper wire from his pocket. 18 inches, thin, flexible. He bent it into a specific shape, a shallow U with the ends separated by about ½ an inch. His fingers positioned the wire. One end touched the high-voltage wire from the magneto. The other end touched a grounded bolt on the engine block. The gap between them was bridged by the copper wire. Marcel stepped back. It will take approximately 90 seconds. The resistance fighters waited. The truck continued to run. 60 seconds passed. The engine sounded normal. Jean-Pierre started to speak. "Marcel, I do not think—" The engine coughed. Missed a beat. Recovered. Then missed 2 beats. Then it began running rough. Very rough. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. 15 seconds later, the engine seized completely. The sudden silence was startling. Laurent stepped forward. "What happened?" Marcel explained. "The wire created a short circuit. The electrical current flowed through the wire instead of the spark plugs. The wire heated up. When it got hot enough, the resistance increased. That caused a voltage spike. The magneto burned out. No magneto means no spark. No spark means no combustion." Someone checked the engine. The magneto was indeed burned out, completely destroyed. The truck would not run again until the magneto was replaced. Laurent asked the critical question: "Can you do this to a Panzer IV?" "Yes," Marcel said. "The Panzer IV uses a similar magneto system. I know where the wiring is located. I can reach it through the ventilation grills on the engine deck." "How long would it take? Per tank?" "If I can work without interruption, about 60 seconds per tank. Maybe 75 seconds if I need to verify placement." Laurent did the mathematics. 12 tanks at 75 seconds each. 15 minutes total. The guard patrols passed every 15 to 20 minutes. It was possible. Barely. If you want to see how Marcel's wire trick worked against 12 Nazi tanks, hit that like button right now. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this one. Make sure you subscribe if you have not already. Now, back to Marcel and the most dangerous 15 minutes of his life. The plan was approved on September 12th at 4:00 p.m. Marcel would infiltrate the tank depot before dawn on September 14th. A guide named Sophie would lead him through German lines. Sophie was 19 years old. She had been running messages for the resistance since 1942. She knew every path, every guard post, every patrol schedule in the area around Epinal. The Germans had stopped searching her months ago. A teenage girl carrying bread and milk was not a threat. The plan required precise timing. Marcel and Sophie would leave the Resistance safe house at 3:30 a.m. The walk to the depot would take 47 minutes. They would arrive at 4:17 a.m., 3 minutes after the guard change. The new guards would need 3 to 5 minutes to settle in, check their posts, and establish their patrol pattern. That gave Marcel a window starting at approximately 4:20 a.m. Guard patrols walked through the tank parking area every 15 to 18 minutes. Marcel would have one full patrol gap to complete his work. 15 minutes, 12 tanks. If a patrol appeared early, Sophie would signal Marcel by squeezing his shoulder twice. Marcel would have to hide immediately. If they were caught, the cover story was simple. Sophie was showing her blind uncle the depot. He had been a mechanic before the war and wanted to see German tanks. See was the wrong word, but the Germans would not question it. The Resistance prepared for 2 days. Sophie memorized the exact layout of the depot from reconnaissance photographs. She practiced guiding Marcel through obstacles in darkness. Marcel practiced placing his wire on similar German vehicles. On the captured truck, Marcel could now place the wire in 45 seconds. On a German half-track, 52 seconds. The Panzer IV would be similar but possibly slower due to tighter access through the grills. The Resistance gave Marcel 12 pieces of copper wire. Each piece was 18 inches long, pre-cut to the exact length needed. Marcel coiled them carefully and put them in his coat pocket. Laurent gave final instructions on the evening of September 13th. If anything goes wrong, if you are discovered before you finish, abort immediately. 12 tanks disabled is victory. 6 tanks disabled is still valuable. Even 2 or 3 tanks disabled might save American lives. But if you are captured, you accomplish nothing, and the Germans will know we can sabotage their vehicles. Do you understand? Marcel understood. Marcel and Sophie left the safe house exactly on schedule. The night was dark. Cloud cover blocked the moon and stars. Perfect conditions for infiltration. Sophie guided Marcel along paths she had memorized. They moved slowly. Marcel could not see obstacles. Sophie had to describe each step. Tree root ahead. Step up 4 inches. Now level ground for 20 paces. Stop. German checkpoint 50 yards ahead. They bypassed 3 German checkpoints. Sophie knew the gaps in the patrols. She knew where the sentries stood and where they could not see. Marcel followed her exactly. At 4:19 a.m., they reached the depot perimeter. Sophie whispered, "The fence is 8 feet high. Wire mesh. There is a gap at the bottom on the east side. The guards know about it but do not care. It is too small for a man to bring weapons or explosives through." They crawled through the gap. Sophie led Marcel across open ground to the first tank. The Panzer IVs were parked in 2 rows of 6. The closest tank was row 1, position 1. Marcel's hands found the tank. Cold steel, the distinctive shape of the Panzer IV. He had worked on these tanks before. French forces had captured several in 1940 before the collapse. Marcel had studied them, learned their mechanical systems, memorized their layouts. His hands moved to the rear deck. The engine compartment was below this armor plating. The ventilation grills were recessed openings designed to let heat escape while protecting the engine from small arms fire. Marcel's fingers found the grill. The openings were narrow, about 2 inches wide and 8 inches long. His hand fit through. Barely. He reached inside. His fingers traced the engine components. Hot metal. The engines had been running recently. Probably tested yesterday. The residual heat would actually help. Warm components were easier to identify by touch. Temperature differences told him what he was feeling. He found the magneto housing. His fingers traced the wiring harness. The high-voltage wire was exactly where it should be, covered in rubber insulation, hot to the touch from the electrical current constantly flowing through it. Marcel pulled the first piece of copper wire from his pocket. He bent it into shape, U-shaped, ends separated by approximately ½ an inch. He positioned it carefully, one end against the high-voltage wire, the other end touching the grounded engine block. The wire stayed in place. The natural spring of the bent copper held it firmly against both contact points. Tank 1, complete. Time elapsed, 58 seconds. Sophie touched his arm. Next tank, follow me. They moved to tank 2, row 1, position 2. Marcel repeated the process. His hands were faster this time. He knew exactly what he was looking for. The muscle memory from practicing on the captured truck and half-track made his movements automatic. Tank 2, complete. Time elapsed, 51 seconds. They moved to Tank 3. Marcel's confidence grew with each tank. The Panzer IVs were mechanically identical. Every magneto was in the same location. Every wire harness followed the same path. His blind precision was faster than sighted work would have been. He did not waste time looking. His hands knew where to go. Tank 3, complete, 49 seconds. Tank 4, complete, 47 seconds. Tank 5, complete, 52 seconds. Tank 6, complete, 48 seconds. 6 tanks. Total time, 5 minutes and 25 seconds. They were ahead of schedule. Then Sophie squeezed Marcel's shoulder twice. Guards. Marcel froze. He was crouched beside Tank 6, his hands still inside the engine grill. Sophie pulled him down flat against the ground beside the tank's tracks. Marcel heard boots on gravel. 2 sets, walking at a steady pace. Not running, not searching. Just routine patrol. The voices were German. Marcel understood German. Most French mechanics learned it. The Germans brought their vehicles to French garages for repairs in the earlies, occupation years. "Did you hear about Mueller?" one guard asked. "What about him?" the other replied. "Got sent to the Eastern Front." Poor bastard. They were talking casually. Not alert, not suspicious. The boots came closer. Marcel pressed himself tighter against the tank. The cold steel of the tracks was inches from his face. He controlled his breathing. Slow. Quiet. Sophie's hand was on his arm. She was breathing normally. Calm. She had done this before. The boots stopped. Right beside the tank. Marcel could smell cigarette smoke. One of the guards had lit a cigarette. They were standing 8 feet away. "Think these tanks will make a difference?" the first guard asked. "Against the Americans? Maybe. If we get them there before the Americans bring up their anti-tank guns. They leave at 6 a.m.? Yes. 3 hours from now. 3 hours. Marcel had 6 more tanks to sabotage, and less than 10 minutes before the next patrol. The guards finished their cigarettes. The boots moved away. Marcel counted their steps. 20 paces. 30. 40. 50. Sophie squeezed his arm once. All clear. They moved to Tank 7. Marcel's hands were shaking slightly. Adrenaline. He forced himself to focus. Hands found the grill. Reached inside. Located the wiring. Placed the copper wire. Tank 7. Complete. 56 seconds. Slower. The shaking hands cost him time. Tank 8 was different. Marcel's hand went through the grill and immediately encountered an obstacle. Something was blocking access to the wiring harness. His fingers explored. A metal plate. Someone had installed a protective cover over the magneto housing. This was not standard. Marcel had never seen this modification on any Panzer IV. Someone had added extra protection, possibly a field modification by the German mechanics. Marcel whispered to Sophie, "There is a cover. I cannot reach the wiring. Can you remove it?" Marcel's fingers traced the cover, bolted in place. 4 bolts. He could feel the heads, but he had no tools. He could not remove the cover without making noise. "No," he said. "We have to skip this tank." Sophie was quiet for a moment. "We need to disable as many as possible. Can you reach the wiring any other way?" Marcel thought. The Panzer IV had multiple access points. The primary engine grill on the rear deck, but also smaller maintenance hatches on the sides. Those hatches were locked, but the locks were simple. Marcel had picked similar locks before. He moved to the side of the tank. His fingers found the maintenance hatch. A simple bolt lock. He pulled a piece of wire from his pocket. Not the copper wire for sabotage. A different piece. Thinner. Stiffer. He inserted the wire into the lock mechanism. Felt for the internal catch. Found it. Twisted. The lock clicked open. The hatch swung open. Marcel reached inside. This angle was awkward. He had to reach up and to the left. His shoulder pressed against the tank hull. His fingers found the wiring. From this angle, he could bypass the protective cover. The wire went in place. Tank 8, complete. 2 minutes and 14 seconds, 3 times longer than normal. He closed the hatch, relocked it. No evidence of tampering. Tank 9 should have been routine. Marcel's hands found the grill. No protective cover this time, standard access. He reached inside. Then he dropped the wire. His fingers were tired. The repeated motions, the tension, the awkward angles. When he pulled the 9th piece of copper wire from his pocket, his grip slipped. The wire fell. Marcel heard it hit the ground. A soft metallic sound. Not loud, but in the quiet of the depot, every sound seemed amplified. He knelt and swept his hand across the ground. Nothing. Moved left. Nothing. Moved right. Found it. But the delay had cost time, and Sophie was squeezing his shoulder again. 2 squeezes. Guards approaching. Marcel had the wire in his hand, but had not placed it yet. He was halfway through the job on Tank 9. If he abandoned it now, they would have 8 tanks disabled instead of 9. He made a decision. He stayed. His hands moved fast, bent the wire, reached through the grill, found the wiring harness, positioned the wire, one end on the high-voltage line, other end on the ground. Sophie pulled on his arm. The guards were close, very close. Marcel finished. Tank 9, complete. They dropped flat beside the tank just as the guards walked past. 6 feet away, close enough that Marcel could hear them breathing. The guards did not look down. They walked past. Marcel's heart was pounding. That had been too close. 3 tanks remaining. Tank 10, Tank 11, Tank 12. Sophie checked her watch. 4:37 a.m. They had been in the depot for 18 minutes. The next patrol would come at 4:40 a.m., maybe 4:42 if they were slow. 3 minutes, 3 tanks. Marcel moved to Tank 10. His hands were steady again. The dropped wire had scared him, but fear had turned into focus. He worked faster. Tank 10, complete. 43 seconds. Tank 11, complete. 41 seconds. Tank 12, the last one. Marcel's fingers found the grill, reached inside, located the wiring, pulled the last piece of copper wire from his pocket. He bent it, positioned it. The wire went into place. Tank 12, complete. Sophie pulled his arm. Guards, now! They ran. Well, Sophie ran. She pulled Marcel along, describing obstacles as they moved. Left, tree, right, fence gap ahead. Behind them, Marcel heard shouting in German. The guards had spotted movement, but they were 50 yards away and it was still dark. Sophie and Marcel reached the fence, crawled through the gap, kept moving. The shouting faded behind them. They had done it. 12 tanks, 15 minutes, 1 blind mechanic and 1 teenage guide. Now they had to wait and see if the wire trick actually worked. Marcel and Sophie reached the resistance safe house at 5:23 a.m. They had moved fast through German lines, using the pre-dawn darkness as cover. Laurent was waiting. Did you finish? All 12 tanks, Marcel said. The wire is in place. The guards saw us leaving, Sophie added. They shouted but did not pursue. Laurent looked worried. If they saw you, they will search the depot. They might find the wire before the tanks start. Marcel shook his head. The wire is hidden. It looks like debris. Even if they find 1 or 2, they will not understand what it does, and they will not find all 12. How long until the sabotage takes effect? The tanks need to start their engines. Once the engines are running, the wire will heat up in 60 to 90 seconds. Then the magneto burns out. Laurent checked his watch. The tanks are scheduled to depart at 6 a.m. 37 minutes. They waited. The minutes crawled by. Marcel sat in a chair, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Sophie made coffee. Laurent paced. At 5:47 a.m., a resistance scout arrived with bad news. The Germans are doing a full inspection of the tanks. They are checking everything. Marcel's stomach dropped. A full inspection meant they would open the engine compartments. They would look at the wiring. They might find the copper wire. How many tanks have they inspected? Laurent asked. 4. They are moving slowly, being thorough. 4 tanks inspected, 8 remaining. If the Germans found the wire in one of the 4, they would immediately check all the others. The entire operation would fail. Laurent made a difficult decision. We assume the operation has failed. We need to prepare alternate plans to delay the tanks. Marcel felt the weight of failure. He had risked his life and Sophie's life for nothing. The wire trick had been discovered. At 5:58 a.m., another scout arrived. This one was out of breath from running. "The tanks are starting their engines," he gasped. "The inspection finished. They found nothing. The tanks are preparing to leave." Marcel stood up. "How long ago did they start the engines?" 2 minutes, maybe 3. If the wire trick worked, the magnetos should burn out between 60 and 90 seconds after the engines started. 3 minutes had passed. The scout continued. "The Germans are confused. 3 of the tanks stopped running. The mechanics are trying to restart them. 3 tanks, not 12. Laurent looked at Marcel. "Why only 3? Marcel thought. "The engines need to run for the wire to heat up. If some tanks have not started yet, the sabotage will not take effect immediately." They waited. The darkest moment of the operation. 3 tanks disabled, 9 still operational. Would the rest fail? Or had something gone wrong with Marcel's wire placement? At 6:04 a.m., the scout returned with an update. 5 more tanks stopped. The Germans are panicking. The mechanics cannot figure out what is wrong. 8 tanks disabled, 4 still running. Marcel explained what was happening. Some tanks started their engines earlier than others. The wire needs time to heat up. The effect is cascading. As each engine runs, the sabotage activates. At 6:09 a.m., 9 tanks disabled. At 6:12 a.m., 10 tanks disabled. At 6:15 a.m., 11 tanks disabled. 1 tank remained operational. Tank 8, the one with the protective cover. The one Marcel had accessed through the side hatch. The German mechanics were frantically trying to restart the disabled tanks. They checked fuel lines. They checked batteries. They found nothing obviously wrong. The engines would crank but would not fire. Then one mechanic made a discovery. He opened the engine compartment on Tank 3 and examined the magneto. It was burned out, completely destroyed. He checked Tank 5. Same problem. Burned out magneto. The mechanic reported to his commanding officer, "Sir, all these tanks have failed magnetos. This cannot be coincidence. This is sabotage." The commanding officer ordered a complete inspection. Every tank, every magneto. Find the cause. At 6:23 a.m., a mechanic found the copper wire in Tank 7. He pulled it out and showed it to his officer. "This was wedged between the high voltage line and the engine block," the mechanic explained. "It created a short circuit. That is why the magneto burned out." The commanding officer understood immediately. "Check all the tanks. Find these wires and remove them." But it was too late. The magnetos were already destroyed. Removing the wire would not repair the damage. The magnetos would need to be replaced. That would take hours, maybe days if replacement parts were not available locally. The scout at the depot counted the results. 11 tanks disabled, 1 tank still operational. At 6:31 a.m., Tank 8 was still running. The German commander made a decision. "We cannot wait for repairs. Send Tank 8 to support the counterattack. Every other available vehicle goes with it. Trucks, half-tracks, whatever is operational." 1 Panzer IV left the depot at 6:38 a.m., accompanied by 4 trucks and 2 half-tracks. Not the armored spearhead the Germans had planned. Just 1 tank and some support vehicles. The scout reported this to Laurent. 1 tank escaped. It is heading toward the American bridgehead. Marcel felt the partial failure. He had disabled 11 tanks, but 1 had escaped. That 1 tank could still kill American soldiers. Laurent had a different perspective. "Marcel, you just stopped 11 tanks with wire. 11. The Germans plan to attack with 12 Panzer IVs. Now they have 1. Do you understand what you accomplished?" Marcel understood intellectually, but emotionally he focused on the 1 tank that got away. Sophie spoke up. "What about Tank 8? Can we stop it?" Laurent shook his head. "It is already gone. We have no way to intercept it before it reaches the American positions." Marcel thought. The wire in Tank 8 was placed differently. I accessed it through the side hatch, not the main grill. The wire might not have been positioned correctly, or the angle was wrong. That is why it did not fail. Can anything still go wrong with that tank? Laurent asked. Maybe, Marcel said. If the wire is still in place, it might heat up eventually. The tank has been running for, he calculated, about 30 minutes now. If the wire was not positioned perfectly, it might take longer to heat up, or it might never fail. They had no choice but to hope, and to warn the Americans that one tank was coming. The resistance radioed the American forces at the Moselle bridgehead. German counterattack reduced. Expect 1 Panzer IV and light support vehicles instead of 12 tanks. The Americans received the message with confusion and then relief. 1 tank was manageable. 12 tanks would have been a disaster. The American commander at the bridgehead, a captain named Richardson, immediately repositioned his forces. He had 3 bazooka teams. Against 12 tanks, those teams would have been overwhelmed. Against 1 tank, they had excellent odds. Tank 8 and its support vehicles approached the American positions at 7:42 a.m. The German commander in Tank 8 was confused by the lack of other tanks, but followed his orders. Attack the American bridgehead. The Panzer IV advanced toward the American lines. The Americans held their fire. Let the tank come closer, closer. At 200 yards, the Panzer IV fired its 75mm main gun. The shell hit an American supply truck and exploded. The Germans in the support vehicles began firing machine guns and rifles. The American bazooka teams moved into position. They needed to get within 100 yards for effective shots. At 7:47 a.m., something unexpected happened. Tank 8 stopped moving. The engine had seized. After running for 69 minutes, the imperfectly placed copper wire had finally heated up enough to burn out the magneto. The tank rolled to a stop in the middle of the battlefield. The German crew tried to restart the engine. Nothing. They tried again. Nothing. The tank commander made a decision. Abandon the vehicle. The crew bailed out and ran for the German lines. The American forces captured Tank 8 intact 20 minutes later. The German support vehicles had retreated when the tank stopped. The German counterattack had completely failed. 0 tanks reached the American bridgehead in working condition. Marcel's wire trick had stopped all 12. The resistance compiled the results over the following days. Before Marcel's sabotage operation, German tanks available, 12 Panzer IVs, expected American casualties, 400 to 600 probability of German success, 70 to 80%. After Marcel's sabotage operation, German tanks that reached American lines, 0 actual American casualties from the counterattack, 4 wounded, 0 killed German casualties, 2 killed, 7 wounded, 1 tank captured, time required for German tank repairs, 6 days minimum resources used, personnel, 1 blind mechanic, 1 guide equipment, 12 pieces of copper wire, 18 inches each, time and target area, 15 minutes, cost, approximately $2 in copper wire. The Germans conducted an investigation into the tank failures. The burned-out magnetos were obvious. The copper wire found in Tank 7 was conclusive evidence of sabotage. But the investigation report concluded the sabotage must have been conducted by multiple people over several hours using specialized tools and expertise. The German officers could not believe one person working alone for 15 minutes could have disabled 12 tanks. They never suspected a blind mechanic. The German military issued new security protocols for tank depots, more frequent patrols, better lighting, physical barriers around parked vehicles. But these protocols focused on preventing teams of saboteurs with tools and explosives. They did not account for a single person with wire. The American forces at the Moselle bridgehead held their position. Without the German counterattack, they consolidated their hold on the east bank of the river. Additional American units crossed over the following days. The bridgehead became the foundation for the American advance deeper into German-held territory. Historians later identified the Moselle crossing as a critical turning point in the liberation of eastern France. None of the official histories mentioned Marcel Rousseau or his wire trick. The operation remained classified. The Americans did not want the Germans to know how effective simple sabotage techniques could be. Marcel's wire trick did not become standard resistance procedure. The French resistance operated in independent cells with limited communication between groups. The technique remained known only to the resistance fighters in the Epinal region. However, the fundamental principle spread informally. Other resistance mechanics learned that simple electrical shorts could disable vehicles. The specific placement of the wire varied by vehicle type, but the concept was universal. Between September 1944 and May 1945, the French resistance documented at least 23 successful vehicle sabotage operations using similar electrical shorting techniques. Trucks, half-tracks, and several more tanks were disabled, using variations of Marcel's method. The German military never developed an effective counter to this type of sabotage. They could not shield every electrical junction in every vehicle. The wire was too small to detect during routine inspections, and the damage looked like mechanical failure rather than deliberate sabotage. After the success at Epinal, Marcel continued working with the resistance. He trained other mechanics in sabotage techniques. He developed additional methods for disabling German equipment. In October 1944, Marcel sabotaged a German fuel depot by contaminating 4,000 gallons of diesel fuel with a chemical that caused engine corrosion. The contamination was not discovered until the fuel was already distributed to German vehicles throughout the region. 47 trucks and 3 tanks suffered engine damage. In November 1944, Marcel designed a delayed action device that could be hidden in vehicle fuel tanks. The device would dissolve slowly over 48 to 72 hours, then release a chemical that made the fuel non-combustible. German vehicles would run normally for 2 or 3 days, then suddenly fail. The timing made it impossible for the Germans to trace the sabotage back to a specific event or location. Marcel was wounded twice, once in December 1944, when a German patrol surprised his resistance unit. A bullet grazed his left arm. Once in January 1945, when a sabotaged German ammunition dump exploded earlier than expected. Marcel was 200 yards away, but was knocked down by the blast wave. He suffered a concussion and temporary hearing loss. Both times he recovered and returned to work within days. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Marcel was in Lyon when the news arrived. He was 35 years old, still blind, still alive. The French government awarded Marcel the Croix de Guerre for his resistance service. The citation mentioned his exceptional mechanical expertise and courage in conducting sabotage operations against enemy forces. It did not mention the wire trick or the 12 tanks. Those details remained classified. Marcel returned to civilian life. He reopened his father's garage in Lyon. The garage had been closed since 1943. The Germans had confiscated most of the tools and equipment. Marcel rebuilt the business. He hired 2 assistants who could see. Together, they repaired civilian vehicles. Marcel worked by touch, diagnosing problems by sound and feel. His reputation spread. People came from across Lyon to have Marcel examine their vehicles. They trusted his expertise. Marcel married in 1948. His wife, Elise, had been a resistance courier during the war. They had 2 children, a daughter born in 1949, a son born in 1951. Marcel never told his children about the wire trick or the 12 tanks. He told them he had been a mechanic in the resistance. He told them he had worked to disrupt German operations. He never told them he had been directly responsible for stopping a German counterattack that could have killed hundreds of American soldiers. Elise knew. Sophie knew. Laurent knew. A handful of resistance fighters knew. But Marcel did not talk about it outside that small circle. Marcel received the Croix de Guerre in 1945. He received a second medal, the Médaille de la Résistance, in 1946. In 1964, the French government declassified some resistance operation records. The Epinal tank sabotage was briefly mentioned in a summary report. No names were included. In 1979, a French military historian researching resistance operations discovered Marcel's name in archived documents. The historian contacted Marcel and requested an interview. Marcel was 69 years old. He agreed to the interview on the condition that it would not be published until after his death. The interview was conducted in December 1979. Marcel described the entire operation, the wire trick, the infiltration of the depot, the 15 minutes that disabled 12 tanks. The historian was skeptical. "You did this completely blind? In 15 minutes?" Marcel offered to demonstrate. The historian brought a truck to Marcel's garage. Marcel, at 69 years old and completely blind for 35 years, placed a piece of wire in the truck's ignition system in 52 seconds. The truck's engine seized 87 seconds later. The historian published the interview in 1994, 5 years after Marcel's death. Marcel Rousseau died on March 15, 1989, at the age of 79. He died in his sleep at his home in Lyon. His wife and children were with him. The garage continued operating until 2003, when it was sold to a new owner. The new owner kept the name, Rousseau Automobile Services. A small plaque was installed at the garage in 1995, after the historian's article was published. The plaque reads, Marcel Rousseau, 1910-1989. Master mechanic and French resistance fighter. His expertise saved countless lives. The wire trick itself remains a historical curiosity. Modern vehicles have completely different electrical systems. The magneto-ignition used in 1940s German tanks no longer exists in current military equipment. But the principle remains relevant. Simple sabotage using minimal equipment can achieve strategic effects if applied with expertise and precision. Military engineers studying asymmetric warfare still reference Marcel's operation as an example of how technical knowledge can multiply the effectiveness of limited resources. Sophie, Marcel's guide during the operation, lived until 2012. She was 87 years old when she died. She gave several interviews in her later years describing the night of September 14, 1944. I was terrified, she said in a 2009 interview. Marcel was completely calm. He knew exactly what he was doing. I was just there to guide him. He was the one who saved those American soldiers. 12 tanks, 15 minutes, 18 inches of copper wire. One blind mechanic who refused to let his disability stop him from serving. One teenage guide who risked her life to lead him through enemy territory. And one ridiculous wire trick that stopped a German counterattack cold. Marcel Rousseau never sought recognition. He never wrote a memoir. He never claimed to be a hero. He was a mechanic who did his job, but his job saved lives. American soldiers who never knew his name went home because Marcel spent 15 minutes placing wire in German tanks. That is the definition of a hero, someone who does what needs to be done, regardless of recognition. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button right now. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. More people need to know about Marcel Rousseau and what he did with nothing but wire and determination. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We are rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about mechanics who stopped tanks. Stories about teenagers who guided blind heroes through enemy lines. Real people, real courage, real impact. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, France? Our community stretches across the entire world. You are not just a viewer. You are part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served in World War II. Tell us if you know a veteran who deserves to be remembered. Just let us know you are here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Marcel Rousseau does not disappear into silence. Thank you for honoring the blind mechanic who stopped 12 tanks with wire and 15 minutes of courage. These men and women deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.